And welcome back to another video. My name is Jake the Genealogist, and in today's video we're going to be going over the family tree of Gandhi. And so first, before I actually get into his family, I'm going to get into his actual life and story. Now, Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi was born on the 2nd of October 1869 in Porbandar, then part of the British Raj, but in modern-day Gujarat. And his parents were Karamchand Uttamchand Gandhi and Putlibai Gandhi. Now, his father was a pretty important political figure in Porbandar and was already on his fourth marriage by the time of Gandhi's birth. All three of his previous wives had actually died young, though two actually gave birth to daughters. In total, Mohandas had 3 older full siblings and 2 much older half-siblings. His full siblings were a brother, Laxmidas, a sister, Raliat Ben, and another brother, Karsandas. And now, his half-siblings were Muliben and Pankunvar who are not really depicted on this chart. Now, his family was deeply religious, with both of his parents being Hindu. He was especially influenced by his mother, who was very pious. Now, skipping ahead several years, by 1883, he had married his wife Kasturba, yes, at 14 years old, due to an arranged marriage. By 1885, when Gandhi was 16, his father died. Later that year, his first child with his wife died at only a few days old. Gandhi grieved these 2 deaths in the family, and it affected him very much. By the next year, he had actually graduated from high school and enrolled at the Samaldus College to study law, but he dropped out quickly, unfortunately. By 1888, he was convinced by a family friend to actually study law in London instead. Even though his family didn't really support this idea, his brother Laxmidas did, because he was already a lawyer himself. And when he reached London, he enrolled at University College London with the hopes of becoming a barrister one day. Now, in London, it was pretty hard to maintain his promise made to his mother to actually keep his customs. However, he eventually found company in the form of the London Vegetarian Society and its president Arnold Hills. By 1891, he was admitted to the bar and sailed back to India, only to find that his mother had just died and the family actually kept the news from him. After a few unsuccessful ventures, he got the attention of a Muslim merchant whose cousin in South Africa needed a lawyer for hire. He accepted and sailed to the colony of Natal in South Africa. Immediately upon coming to South Africa, he realized how much discrimination there was. Like most people of color in the country, he was treated as a second-class citizen to the white people. He started to regularly protest this treatment. South Africa was definitely where his ideology started to form. After his court case, he expected to sail home. However, a new government bill against Indians' voting rights forced him to stay and help. His campaign, though it didn't stop the bill, brought together many of South Africa's Indian population to form the Natal Indian Congress. Though he cared much about the rights of Indians in South Africa, he very much ignored the discrimination against the native population of Africans during his time there. His ideologies would luckily change in the future for the better. Now, during his last years in South Africa, he established Tolstoy Farm, an ashram to encourage peaceful protesting with several of his friends who were Jewish, including Herman Kallenbach and Sonia Schlesien. He returned to India by 1915 and was becoming one of the foremost Indian nationalists. He joined the Indian National Congress and became leader of it by 1920. He started his protests during and after World War I, and they often worked and often didn't. By 1919, Gandhi began to seek partnership for Indian independence with the Muslims in the country. He supported the Ottoman Empire, even after defeat, and the Caliphate movement. His idea worked, and though other Hindu nationalists questioned his tactics, the violence between the Muslims and Hindus in India began to calm down. By 1922, however, the Turkish Caliphate actually collapsed, along with the Caliphate movement, and Muslim support died down for a while. During this time, he took up his now famous tradition of wearing only a loincloth as a symbol of Indian poverty. Now, one of his main pleas to Indians was to stop the violence and only protest peacefully, even if that meant that the British would still use violence. Now, skipping ahead quite a few years, by 1930, Congress officially declared Indian independence from the British Raj. Of course, the British weren't about to give up so easily like that. Gandhi ignored this. He and his followers paraded through the streets in January, and he launched another protest in March against a new salt tax, and led the famous 24-day, 240-mile Salt March. 60,000 and possibly more Indians, including Gandhi himself, were actually put in jail as a result of this, including Jawaharlal Nehru. Now, during this time, many women actually became active leaders in the independence movement. So, yeah, that's pretty cool. However, some historians actually debate over whether Gandhi encouraged this or not. A year later, the Gandhi-Irwin Pact was signed, basically freeing all the remaining political prisoners. One of Gandhi's main critics during the 1930s was good old Winston Churchill, not quite prime minister yet, though, who called Gandhi the Hindu Mussolini. Touché. During the Round Table Conferences in 1931 and 1932, no progress, unfortunately, was made at all between the Indians and the British. Gandhi resigned in 1934 as head of the Congress, citing the personal dissatisfaction and compared to his political beliefs and their willingness to actually compromise with the Raj itself. Now, come World War II, he began to oppose Indian involvement. He hated the Nazis and the fascists, but he also didn't want the Indian population to fight on behalf of a colony they were oppressed under. And Gandhi, now 73 years old, formed a brand new movement, and is most overarching of them all, the Quit India movement. And he was very quickly arrested after this, and imprisoned along with his fellow members of the committee for about 2 years. Now, during this lovely imprisonment, his wife of 61 years, Kasturba, died in February 1944. His secretary, Mahadev Desar, died from a heart attack, and he himself caught really bad malaria. He was released by May 1944 by the Raj, so he wouldn't die and completely enrage the population. Now, after his release, he met with future founder of Pakistan, Muhammad Ali Jinnah. Gandhi wanted one huge Indian supercontinent, ideally, after independence, with all religions and races coexisting, while Jinnah ideally wanted partitions on ethnic and religious boundaries, and this became a contentious issue for several years. At this point, all 100,000 of the other prisoners were released on Gandhi's behest, and Britain soon began starting to negotiate independence. By 1946, however, Jinnah had rejected Gandhi's proposal and called for a large-scale Muslim protest called Direct Action Day, which actually triggered a mass murdering of thousands of Hindus, of which the British didn't actually take any action at all. By 1947, Britain agreed, albeit reluctantly, to give independence to India, and accepted Jinnah's proposal of partitioning the Raj into Pakistan and India, respectively. Gandhi spent the day not celebrating, but actually still protesting the violence against citizens by fasting. Some people think he single-handedly stopped the violence with this act. Sadly, on the 30th of January 1948 at 5 p.m., when Gandhi was with his grandnieces, a Hindu nationalist, Nathuram Godse, fired 3 bullets into Gandhi's chest, killing him almost immediately. According to Godse, he killed Gandhi due to his complacency towards Muslims. He was later executed by hanging in 1949. Then Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru, recognize him, delivered a speech in honor of him, and the millions mourned him at a 5-mile-long funeral procession. Now, Gandhi's influence on the world is huge. He influenced so many people, from Martin Luther King to Nelson Mandela to Aung San Suu Kyi, as well as many other non-politicians like John Lennon and Albert Einstein. His idea of peaceful protesting influenced many other independence and civil rights movements to this day. This is not to really venerate him as a saint or godlike figure. As I mentioned, much of Gandhi's personal beliefs could be seen today as pretty controversial and incorrect, but that just shows how much of a human being he is instead. Alright, sappy speech aside, let's get into his family and descendants. Now, his aforementioned father was Karamchand Gandhi, and his mother was Putlibai. Karamchand had several siblings, including Jivanchan, Tulsidas, and Vallabhji Gandhi. His father was Uttamchand Gandhi, and his mother was Laxmiba, and Uttamchand's father was Hirjavan Gandhi. And all of Gandhi's ancestors really lived in their ancestral home of Porbandar, dating back at least a century. Now, getting to Gandhi's siblings' children. Now, the only one who really had an important child was Laxmidas. His son Samaldas briefly joined became the de facto leader of the state of Junagadh. And when they joined Pakistan, he became for a short while the head of the government in exile. Now, getting to Gandhi's children, he had 4 sons who survived: Harilal, Manilal, Ramdas, and Devdas. Now, getting to all of his children, Harilal started as a supporter of his father, but he also wished to travel to England and become a barrister, just like his father. Gandhi didn't support this. Harilal eventually, unfortunately, renounced all of his family ties and even abandoned his own children and became an alcoholic, dying at the age of 60 in 1948. His children were Rani Ben, known as Rami, Kantilal, and Manorama, known as Manu. Rami married Kunverji Parikh and had children Ansuya, Prabodh, Neelam, and Navmalika. Kantilal had 2 children, Shanti Kumar and Pradeep. Fun fact, Kantilal's son Shanti actually immigrated to the United States and became a surgeon. He won election to become the member of the Kansas State House of Representatives, actually, serving for 1 term as a Republican from 2013 to 2015. Now, Manu was pretty special in Gandhi's story. It's said that near the end of Gandhi's life, she was one of the women who always stayed by his side to take care of him. And she had 1 daughter, Urmi Masharawala, right here. Now, the next son, Manilal, was a different story to his older brother. He stayed in South Africa and actually began helping to print the Gujarati magazine, The Indian Opinion. And he died there in 1956 following a stroke. His children were Sita, Arun, and Ella Gandhi. And both Arun and Ella are currently alive, and both are civil rights activists in South Africa. Arun's son, Tushar, is an activist as well. Now, Ella was also, fun fact, a member of parliament in South Africa for about 10 years. Now, the next child, Ramdas, actually lived the longest of the 4. He participated actively in all of his father's protests, despite his dislike of asceticism, or abstinence to sex, to pursue spiritual joys. And at Gandhi's funeral, he was actually the one who lit the fire to start the cremation, as per his father's request. He died in 1969, and he had 3 children, Kanu, Sumitra, and Usha. Kanu studied at MIT and became a NASA scientist working in the U.S. for the Division for Aircraft Design, and he died only a few years back in 2016. I have hardly any info on his 2 younger sisters, Sumitra and Usha, but as far as I can tell, they're both still alive. Usha's son, Anand Gokani, did actually become a pretty famous doctor. Now, the youngest child, Devdas Gandhi, also supported his father for his whole life. He became the editor of the Hindustan Times and became a pretty well-known journalist. He died in 1957, and his 4 children were Tara, Rajmohan, Ramchanda, and Gopal Krishna Gandhi, and all of them except Ramchandra are still alive. Raj Mohan is a historian, nice, who currently works for the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Ramchandra was a philosopher who graduated from Oxford. He died in 2007. And his daughter Leela is currently the John Hawkes Professor of Humanities and English at Brown University. Pretty high role. And the youngest, Gopal Krishna, actually served as the governor of West Bengal from 2004 to 2009. And just to point out, there are way more descendants of Gandhi that are not on this tree. It's estimated that he currently has about 120 living descendants, and as you can see, many of them have really carried on his legacy of changing the world for the better. Hope you enjoyed this pretty long video, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Goodbye.